"You're too small," he said, but what the massive cowboy did next shocked the whole town. The town of Nova Junction had always been a place where size mattered. Big hands could lift heavy machinery, big voices could command respect, and big horses carried the pride of the ranchers. The people there trusted strength more than brains, and they often looked down on anyone smaller than average. On this particular morning, a tiny figure appeared on the horizon, and all eyes quickly noticed him. Eli Vance was no taller than a child of 12, though his sharp green eyes carried intelligence far beyond his stature. He rode a small hoverbike, a contraption of his own making, which hummed softly and lifted him a foot off the dusty ground. Strapped to his back was a satchel bulging with odd tools and devices that sparkled with metal and wires. Eli was calm, confident, but he knew that most people in Nova Junction would not see his confidence. They would see his size. As he neared the main street, the sound of hooves pounding the ground announced someone coming his way. Bran "Big Buck" Malone, the massive cowboy who ruled Nova Junction with his presence alone, stepped into the street. Bran's shadow stretched across the dusty ground like a moving wall. His boots were polished, his hat wide and dusty from long rides, and his arms were thick as tree trunks. He stopped in front of Eli and looked down. "You're too small for this town," Bran said, his voice booming so loud that several townsfolk turned to watch. "Too small to handle anything that matters." Eli stopped his hoverbike a few feet away, carefully placing one small foot on the ground. He looked up at Bran and smiled faintly. "Maybe," he said softly, "but sometimes the smallest things can make the biggest difference." The crowd laughed, some shaking their heads. In Nova Junction, everyone knew that to survive, you needed strength. Brains alone didn't get you anywhere, at least, that was what they believed. Eli's words, quiet as they were, didn't reach many ears. Only a few curious faces lingered, watching him with suspicion and wonder. Bran laughed, a deep and thunderous sound that made the shutters of the nearby saloon rattle. "You talk big, little man, but talk doesn't build anything. What do you even have in that bag of yours? Candy?" Eli shook his head, unbothered. "Nope, just tools, and a few surprises." The massive cowboy snorted and stepped aside, motioning for Eli to continue down the street. As Eli rode through, he noticed the strange patterns of decay and malfunction that most people ignored. The town's main energy grid had scorch marks from lightning strikes, some of the water pumps squeaked in protest, and several delivery drones hung limp in the air, their circuits fried. Eli's eyes narrowed. Something was wrong in Nova Junction, and he had a feeling it wasn't just wear and tear. He stopped outside a small workshop near the edge of town. The sign read Maddox Mechanics, though its owner, an elderly man named Jeb Maddox, was nowhere to be seen. Eli set down his hoverbike and began examining a small panel on the wall that controlled the streetlights. His fingers moved nimbly, pressing buttons and adjusting wires. Sparks flew briefly, but within moments the lights flickered to life, brighter than they had been in months. "Whoa," whispered a young girl in the crowd, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Did he just fix it?" Bran, who had been watching with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity, stepped closer. "That's just luck," he said, though his voice carried less certainty than before. Eli smiled faintly but said nothing. He had learned early that people like Bran only recognized results when they couldn't ignore them. He moved on down the street, checking machines, devices, and even small generators. Each one that had been failing suddenly hummed with energy under his careful adjustments. Slowly a murmur ran through the townsfolk. By mid-afternoon, Eli's presence had become impossible to ignore. People began to gather, some leaning on fences, others peeking from windows. Even Bran seemed distracted, watching the little man who moved quickly and quietly through the town, fixing things that had been broken for months. Finally, Eli came to the edge of town, where the horizon stretched wide and open. Here he paused, pulled a small device from his satchel and activated it. A holographic map flickered in the air, displaying the town's layout and highlighting areas of malfunction. He studied it carefully, tapping a few spots, making calculations in his head. Bran approached him cautiously, curiosity now mixed with a hint of respect. "All right, tiny man," he said. "I'll admit you know what you're doing, but this town, it's not kind to people your size. Things can get dangerous." Eli looked up at him, his eyes steady. "I know. But danger is the same for big people and small people alike. Sometimes, being small is exactly what you need to survive it." The sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of orange and red. As the shadows grew longer, Eli returned to his hoverbike, preparing to head out to the outskirts where he had noticed strange energy readings. The townsfolk whispered among themselves, unsure whether to trust this tiny newcomer. Bran, however, remained silent, his brow furrowed. There was something different about Eli, something the cowboy couldn't quite put his finger on. Before Eli could leave, a sudden tremor shook the ground. Dust rose from the horizon, and a strange humming sound filled the air. People screamed and ran to the safety of buildings, while Bran's hand instinctively went to the holster at his hip. From the far edge of the plains came a rolling wave of shimmering crystals, alien creatures unlike anything the town had ever seen. They moved in jerky, unnatural motions, glinting under the sun. Eli's eyes widened slightly, but he stayed calm. The creatures, called shardlings, fed on metal and technology. The town's machines were their target, and they moved faster than anything Bran had ever faced. "Eli," Bran shouted over the chaos, "run while you can." But Eli shook his head. He knew running would only make things worse. Instead, he activated a device on his wrist, a small orb that began to hum and glow. It sent a pulse of energy into the air, repelling the nearest shardling slightly but not stopping them entirely. Bran watched, astonished. "What in the how are you doing that?" Eli didn't answer. He focused on his task, recalculating and adjusting the device's settings. Each pulse of energy pushed the creatures back, giving the townsfolk a chance to escape and take shelter. The small inventor moved with a precision and speed that made him almost invisible to the naked eye, dodging shards of crystal as he activated different gadgets from his satchel. The townspeople watched in awe. This little man, whom they had mocked for his size, was now the first line of defense against an alien threat. Even Bran felt a flicker of humility. Here was a person smaller than him in every way, yet braver and more capable in the face of danger. By nightfall, the first wave of shardlings had retreated to the horizon, beaten back not by brute force but by clever devices and quick thinking. Eli collapsed to one knee, breathing heavily but smiling faintly. Bran approached him, his usual swagger replaced with cautious respect. You might just be the smartest thing I've ever seen," Bran admitted. "I was wrong about you. Maybe size doesn't matter as much as I thought." Eli looked up, brushing dust from his sleeves. "Size only matters if you let it define you," he said quietly. "Brains, courage, and preparation, those matter more than anything." The townsfolk, slowly emerging from their hiding spots, cheered for the small inventor. Eli Vance, the tiny man who had come into town unnoticed, had already begun to change how they saw the world. Even Bran, who had ruled with strength and intimidation for years, could not ignore the impact Eli had made in just one afternoon. As the night settled over Nova Junction, Eli walked back to his hoverbike, looking out toward the distant plains. He knew this was just the beginning. The shardlings would return, and when they did, the town would need more than luck to survive. But Eli had a plan. He had a mind for machines, for strategy, and for the impossible. And in a town where strength had always mattered most, he was about to show them that even the smallest person could change everything. The massive cowboy Bran watched silently, realizing that this tiny man might just be the key to the town's survival. And deep down, he felt something he had never felt before: respect. The morning sun rose over Nova Junction like a golden promise, but the town had not yet recovered from the previous day's shock. The townsfolk whispered in small groups, pointing toward the plains where the shimmering crystals had disappeared. Even Bran Big Buck Malone moved more cautiously than usual, his massive frame still radiating authority but tinged with unease. Eli Vance, the tiny inventor who had won their admiration, was already at work in the center of town. He had set up a small workshop near the old water tower, connecting wires and devices to a series of metal poles that he claimed would monitor energy disturbances. The townspeople watched, fascinated and curious. Children peeked from behind barrels, while adults exchanged skeptical glances. But Eli moved with quiet focus, oblivious to the murmurs. "You really think these little gadgets of yours will stop them?" a young mechanic named Leela asked, her arms crossed. Eli smiled faintly without looking up. "They won't stop them entirely," he said, "but they can give us time. Time is the most valuable weapon when you're small." Leela frowned. "I don't get it. How can something so tiny fight creatures that can tear machines apart?" Eli looked at her, his green eyes steady. "Brains can do more than brawn ever will. Watch and see." By midday, the first signs of trouble appeared. The sky darkened unnaturally, not from clouds but from a strange shimmer, as if the very air were vibrating. Birds scattered in panic, and the ground beneath the town began to hum softly. Eli immediately activated a small device that sent a low-frequency pulse into the air, making the humming pulse back in a controlled rhythm. He muttered numbers under his breath, adjusting settings like a conductor leading an orchestra. Then came the first wave. From the horizon, the shardlings returned, bigger and more numerous than before. They moved with terrifying speed, their crystalline bodies catching the sunlight and refracting it into blinding patterns. The townsfolk screamed and ran, trying to find shelter. Horses neighed in fear, and wagons overturned as people scrambled to safety. Bran stepped into the open, towering above everyone else. His massive arms flexed as he grabbed a nearby rope and swung a heavy iron hook at the nearest creature. It shattered one of the shardlings, but immediately, 3 more advanced creatures replaced it. Bran gritted his teeth. Strength alone would not win this fight. Eli, small but fearless, darted between the chaos, activating traps he had placed around the town. Electromagnetic fields surged from his devices, causing the creatures' crystalline bodies to shudder violently. Sparks flew as some shardlings cracked under the pulses, but they quickly adapted, spreading out to attack from different angles. "You're going to need more than toys, little man," Bran shouted, trying to move fast enough to protect the townspeople. Eli didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled out a small, glowing orb and activated it. A dome-shaped energy shield appeared around a cluster of people who had taken cover near the saloon. The shardlings banged against it, their sharp limbs clinking against the invisible barrier. "See," Eli shouted over the noise. "Brains and preparation can save lives." Bran grunted, his respect for Eli growing despite his pride. He grabbed a group of townsfolk and moved them behind the barricades, shouting instructions like a drill sergeant. "Stay low, follow me." The battle intensified. Shardlings began climbing the buildings, smashing signs and splintering wood, their sharp bodies gnashing at metal. Eli's devices pulsed continuously, creating zones of safety, but he knew this was only a temporary solution. "They're learning," he muttered to himself, adjusting his controls. "They're forming a pattern. I need to counter it before it's too late." In the midst of chaos, a young boy named Tommy got separated from his family. He froze in fear as a shardling advanced toward him, its crystal limbs sparkling dangerously. Bran noticed and charged forward, swinging his massive arms. The creature shattered against him, but another was already moving in. Eli, seeing the danger, activated a small grappling device. A thin cable shot out, catching the boy and pulling him safely to the ground. The townspeople gasped. Even Bran could not ignore the fact that Eli, so small and fragile-looking, had just saved a child's life. His heart pounded, not just from the fight, but from the dawning realization that intelligence and courage could outweigh brute strength. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Eli realized that the Shardlings were retreating, not because they had been defeated, but because they had located something they wanted: the town's energy core. If they reached it, Nova Junction's power supply would be destroyed, leaving the town helpless. "We can't just hold them off," Eli said urgently to Bran. "They're heading for the energy plant. If they get there, everything will be gone." Bran clenched his fists. "Then we take the fight to them." Together, they formed a plan. Bran would lead the townsfolk in a defensive maneuver, using his strength and experience to block the main paths. Eli would take to the rooftops and surrounding areas, using his gadgets and quick thinking to control the Shardlings' movements. The small inventor felt a surge of confidence. For the first time, he wasn't just an observer. He was a crucial part of the town's defense. Night fell completely, and the Shardlings advanced under the cover of darkness, their glowing crystal bodies casting eerie lights on the dusty streets. Eli moved like a shadow, activating traps and electromagnetic pulses that forced the creatures to split and scatter. Bran roared and swung his iron hooks, taking down any Shardlings that managed to get past Eli's defenses. The townsfolk, inspired by their leaders, fought bravely with whatever tools they had: pitchforks, hoses, and makeshift weapons. At one point, a massive Shardling tried to reach the energy core, its limbs extending in unnatural ways. Bran charged, but the creature was faster than he anticipated. Eli, seeing the danger, activated a device on his wrist. A magnetic pulse shot out, pulling the Shardling off balance and giving Bran the opening to strike it with a massive swing of his hook. The creature shattered into pieces that clinked and scattered across the ground. Breathing heavily, Bran looked at Eli. I don't know how you do it," he admitted. "You're small, but somehow you're bigger than me right now." Eli shook his head, smiling faintly. "Big doesn't always mean strong. Sometimes small can mean smarter, faster, and braver." The Shardlings, sensing that the town was not an easy target, began to retreat, vanishing into the distant plains. The battle was over for now, but Eli knew this was only the beginning. Nova Junction had survived the first wave, thanks to the combination of brains, courage, and teamwork. But the alien creatures would return, and next time they would be even smarter and more dangerous. The townsfolk gathered in the main square, exhausted but alive. They looked at Eli with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Even Bran, massive and proud, stepped forward, his usual swagger replaced with humility. "You saved the town," Bran said simply. "I thought you were too small. I was wrong. Today you showed us what really matters." Eli nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We all did this together," he said, "and next time we'll be ready. They might be fast, they might be strong, but we're smarter. That's what matters." As the night settled over Nova Junction, the town felt a newfound sense of unity. The people had seen firsthand that size was not the measure of courage or ability. Even Bran, the massive cowboy who had once ruled the town with his strength alone, now understood that brains, planning, and teamwork could be just as powerful. Eli returned to his small workshop near the water tower, quietly adjusting his devices and making notes. The first wave of Shardlings had taught him much, and he was already preparing for the next encounter. The tiny inventor had not only defended Nova Junction, but had also begun to change its people's hearts and minds. In the darkness of the plains, faint glimmers of crystal movement hinted that the Shardlings were regrouping. Their numbers were growing and their strategy was evolving. The next battle would be bigger, faster, and more dangerous. But for Eli, small as he was, this challenge only fueled his determination. The town of Nova Junction had faced danger before, but never like this. And now, with Eli Vance by their side, they had a chance, not just to survive, but to thrive. The massive cowboy Bran and the tiny inventor had become an unlikely team, one that would face whatever threats came next with courage, brains, and heart. For Eli, the horizon held more than danger, it held opportunity. The Shardlings would return, but this time, Nova Junction would be ready. And the smallest man in town would stand taller than anyone, showing that courage, intelligence, and determination could overcome any obstacle, no matter how big. The morning after the first battle, Nova Junction was quiet, almost too quiet. The town had survived the Shardlings' attack, but the damage was clear. Broken fences, smashed vehicles, and scattered shards of crystal littered the streets. The townsfolk moved carefully, repairing what they could while keeping watch for any signs of the alien creatures. Eli Vance had already begun his preparations. He moved with swift, deliberate motions, adjusting devices, checking traps, and recalibrating his hoverbike. His small hands were quick and precise, each movement purposeful. To the untrained eye, it looked like a flurry of chaos, but Eli knew exactly what he was doing. Every trap, every device, every wire was part of a plan. Bran Big Buck Malone watched silently from the edge of the square. The massive cowboy had spent the night thinking. For the first time in his life, he realized that strength alone was not enough. The town needed strategy, and Eli, tiny, quiet, and brilliant, was that strategy. Bran's pride bristled, but he pushed it aside. He had a new respect for the small man who had saved the town. "Eli," Bran called, his deep voice echoing across the square. "I want to help. Tell me what to do." Eli looked up from his work, eyes sharp and calculating. "I need you to lead the townsfolk in defense," he said. "Your strength can block paths, protect people, and handle anything they manage to break through. I'll handle the traps, the gadgets, and the strategy." Bran nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. "I can do that. And don't worry, no one's going to mess with my town while I'm around." Eli adjusted his small device and activated a holographic map above the water tower. Bright lines traced the streets and marked key points where Shardlings were most likely to attack. The townsfolk, now gathered around, watched in awe. Eli explained his plan in simple terms, using diagrams and demonstrations. "See here," Eli said, pointing at the map. "These are the main streets. The Shardlings like to move fast and in groups. I've set traps along these paths. When they approach, the devices will slow them down or push them off course. Bran and the townsfolk will handle anything that gets past the traps. We work together, and we keep them from reaching the energy plant." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. People began to nod, feeling a spark of hope. For the first time, they realized that brains and courage could match the Shardlings' strength. As the sun climbed higher, Eli and Bran worked together to prepare the town. Bran led groups of townsfolk in building barricades, reinforcing structures, and setting up makeshift weapons. Eli's traps were placed carefully along strategic points, designed to control the Shardlings' movements and protect the town's most vulnerable areas. By mid-afternoon, everything was ready, or as ready as it could be. Eli climbed onto his hoverbike, adjusting a small device on his wrist. The hum of energy from his traps filled the air, creating an invisible grid of protection. Bran, massive and imposing, walked the streets, giving orders, moving obstacles, and lifting heavy debris to create defensive positions. Then, just as Eli predicted, the Shardlings returned. This time, they were smarter, faster, and larger than before. The first wave hit the outer streets, bouncing off the traps and being pushed back by the defensive barriers. Sparks flew as Shardlings collided with electromagnetic pulses, their crystal bodies cracking but not breaking entirely. Eli moved through the chaos like a shadow. He activated traps at precise moments, sending pulses of energy that disrupted the Shardlings' coordination. One by one, the creatures were forced into predictable paths, where Bran and the townsfolk waited. Bran swung massive hooks, knocked creatures off balance, and used his incredible strength to protect the people behind the barricades. The townsfolk followed his lead. Leela, the young mechanic, hurled makeshift grenades that exploded in sparks, damaging the shardlings' crystal shells. Tommy, the young boy saved the day before, helped carry supplies to the defensive points. Even the oldest townsfolk found ways to contribute, using pitchforks and water hoses to fend off creatures. Despite the chaos, Eli noticed something alarming. The shardlings were adapting. They began to change their attack patterns, avoiding traps and moving in smaller, coordinated groups. Eli realized that the creatures were learning. He adjusted his devices rapidly, sending pulses in different sequences to confuse them. Suddenly, a massive shardling broke through one of the main barricades. Its crystal limbs glinted menacingly, and it lunged toward the energy plant. Bran roared and charged, swinging his massive hook, but the creature was fast. Eli, seeing the danger, activated a new device. A magnetic pulse shot out, gripping the shardling's limbs and holding it in place. Bran swung with all his might, shattering the creature into fragments that clattered across the street. The townsfolk cheered. For the first time, they felt a sense of real teamwork. Strength, intelligence, courage, they all had a role to play, and together they could face almost anything. But the battle was far from over. From the horizon, Eli spotted a group of larger shardlings, each moving with a terrifying intelligence. They were heading straight for the town's energy plant, the lifeblood of Nova Junction. Eli knew that if these creatures reached it, the town would be powerless. "We need to stop them now," Eli shouted to Bran. "If they reach the plant, everything we've done will be useless." Bran nodded, his massive frame brimming with determination. "Lead the way, little man. I've got your back." Eli and Bran moved quickly, coordinating their attack. Eli used his devices to manipulate the shardlings' movements, forcing them into predictable paths. Bran and the townsfolk struck with precision, blocking, smashing, and defending. Sparks flew, crystal shards scattered, and the air filled with the hum of Eli's devices. Then Eli noticed something extraordinary. One of the shardlings moved differently. It seemed almost confused. Eli realized it was smaller than the others, perhaps younger or weaker. He saw an opportunity. Using a small grappling device, he guided the creature away from the energy plant and into a containment trap he had prepared. The creature struggled, but Eli's device held it securely. Bran clapped Eli on the shoulder, laughing despite the chaos. "I can't believe it, you actually tricked one of them." Eli smiled faintly. "Brains always find a way." The battle raged for hours, but thanks to Eli's devices, Bran's strength, and the townsfolk's courage, Nova Junction held. The shardlings were pushed back, retreating toward the horizon once again. The town had survived, stronger and smarter than before. Exhausted but triumphant, Eli and Bran surveyed the town. People were repairing barricades, collecting shards, and helping the wounded. There was a new energy in the air, a sense of unity and confidence. Even Bran, who had always relied on his size and strength, understood the lesson. Strategy, intelligence, and teamwork could overcome brute force. "You've changed this town, Eli," Bran said quietly. "I don't just mean the fight, I mean everything. People see hope now. They see that brains and courage matter as much as strength." Eli looked out toward the plains, where faint glimmers of crystal movement hinted that the shardlings were regrouping. "This is just the beginning," he said. "They'll come back, smarter and faster, but we'll be ready. We have brains, courage, and each other." Bran nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. "Then we'll be ready. No one messes with my town, not on my watch." As night fell over Nova Junction, Eli and Bran walked through the streets together. The townsfolk watched them, inspired by their teamwork. The tiny inventor and the massive cowboy had become an unlikely duo, showing that size was not the measure of courage or ability. Eli returned to his workshop, already planning the next stage of defense. Bran stayed in the square, keeping watch, his massive frame silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Together, they had turned the tide, showing that Nova Junction could face any threat, with intelligence, strength, and unity. From the distant plains, the Shardlings watched, learning, adapting. Their next attack would be more dangerous, but Nova Junction would be ready. And at the heart of it all was Eli Vance, the smallest man in town, who had proven that courage, brains, and determination could make anyone, and any town, stronger. The battle was far from over. But one thing was certain: Nova Junction would no longer underestimate the power of the small. And Eli Vance, tiny in size but immense in courage and intelligence, was ready for whatever came next. The sun rose over Nova Junction with a golden glow that seemed to promise peace, but Eli Vance knew better. From the distant plains, faint glimmers of crystal reflected the morning light. Shardlings were returning, and this time they were stronger, faster, and more organized. The first two waves had been tests. Now the true assault on the town would begin. Eli worked quickly in his small workshop, adjusting traps, checking his hoverbike, and setting up a new network of devices he hoped would give the town an advantage. His fingers moved with precision, tightening wires, calibrating sensors, and checking energy pulses. Despite his small size, his mind worked at lightning speed, calculating patterns, predicting movements, and planning contingencies. Bran Big Buck Malone walked in, his massive boots echoing against the wooden floor. The cowboy's usually confident expression was serious, his deep eyes scanning the room. "Eli, I've called everyone together. We're ready. They're going to hit us hard this time, but we'll be ready." Eli nodded. "Good. This is the moment we've prepared for. Remember, brains and strategy will make all the difference. We can't just rely on strength." Bran grunted. "Strength alone wouldn't have done anything before. I see that now. But it won't hurt to add a little muscle to the plan." The townsfolk gathered in the square, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. Everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest mechanic, had a role. Some manned barricades, some assisted with devices, and others prepared water hoses, pitchforks, and ropes. Even the horses seemed aware, pawing at the ground and snorting nervously. Eli stepped onto a small platform, the holographic map hovering in the air before him. "Listen carefully," he said. "The Shardlings will attack in multiple groups. One group will come from the east, another from the west, and the largest will come straight down the main street toward the energy plant. Bran, you lead the main defense with the townsfolk. I'll coordinate traps and control the smaller waves. Work together and we can control the battlefield." Bran nodded, his massive arms folding across his chest. "Understood. Let's show them that Nova Junction fights back." The first signs of the Shardlings appeared in the distance. Their crystal bodies shimmered in the sunlight, reflecting dazzling patterns across the plains. Unlike the previous waves, these creatures moved with purpose, their steps calculated, their attacks synchronized. They were no longer mindless. They were a hive of intelligence, learning from every failed attempt. Eli activated his first line of traps. Electromagnetic pulses surged through the streets, slowing the advance of the Shardlings. Sparks flew as the creatures' crystal limbs crackled under the energy fields. Yet they adapted quickly, splitting into smaller groups to avoid the pulses. Eli's eyes narrowed. He needed to be faster, more precise. Bran bellowed orders, his voice booming above the chaos. "Block the streets, protect the buildings, keep the civilians safe." The townsfolk responded with courage and energy. Leela hurled makeshift grenades, sending sparks flying and cracking several Shardlings into harmless shards. Tommy, still full of courage despite his youth, helped relay messages and supplies. Even the elderly, who had once thought themselves too weak, found ways to contribute, using long poles and hoses to push back smaller creatures. The battle raged across the town. Eli darted from roof to roof, activating traps, adjusting energy pulses and guiding the shardlings into preset zones. His small size allowed him to move quickly, dodging attacks and staying just out of reach of the creature's crystal limbs. Suddenly, a massive shardling, larger and faster than any before, broke through a barricade and charged toward the energy plant. Bran roared, swinging his massive hook, but the creature's speed was astonishing. Eli's eyes lit up as he grabbed a device from his satchel. A magnetic pulse shot toward the creature, gripping its limbs and holding it in place. Bran charged, swinging with all his strength, and shattered the shardling into fragments that clattered across the street. The townsfolk cheered, but there was no time to celebrate. Another wave of shardlings appeared on the western streets, moving in perfect formation. Eli realized that the creatures had learned from previous battles. They were coordinating, spreading out, and targeting weak points. He quickly adjusted his devices, sending synchronized pulses to create confusion among the shardlings. The battle became a test of intelligence versus strength. Eli's traps forced the creatures into predictable paths, while Bran's physical might and the townsfolk's courage stopped any that slipped through. Sparks flew, crystal shards clinked against metal, and the air was filled with the hum of Eli's devices. At one point, a shardling managed to reach the town's water tower. Eli activated a grappling device, latching onto the creature and pulling it away from the structure. Bran followed immediately, striking the creature with a massive swing that sent shards scattering across the street. "Brains and strength," Bran said, almost to himself, "working together. Never thought I'd see the day." Eli nodded, focusing on the next wave. "It's not just strength, Bran. It's strategy, courage, and timing. That's what keeps the town alive." The largest group of shardlings advanced toward the main street, moving in a formation that could crush the energy plant if not stopped. Eli quickly devised a plan. He activated multiple devices in sequence, creating a corridor of electromagnetic pulses that forced the creatures into a narrow path. Bran and the townsfolk waited, ready to strike. The shardlings, trapped and disoriented, collided with the barricades and fell into preset traps. Sparks flew as their crystal bodies cracked, and the townsfolk moved with precision, finishing off any that got too close. Eli adjusted pulses constantly, guiding the remaining creatures toward Bran, who swung his massive hooks with unstoppable force. Hours passed like this, the battle continuing with intensity. Eli's small size and quick thinking were the perfect complement to Bran's raw power. The townsfolk, inspired by their leaders, fought with courage they had never known. Together, they turned the tide. Finally, the last of the shardlings approached the energy plant. Eli activated his ultimate device, a large pulse generator that sent a wave of energy through the area. The remaining creatures staggered, disoriented, and weakened. Bran charged with one final swing, shattering the largest shardling into countless fragments. The town was safe. For now, the townsfolk cheered, exhausted but victorious. Sparks from Eli's devices flickered as he deactivated them, and Bran lowered his massive arms, breathing heavily but smiling. "You did it," Bran said, clapping Eli on the shoulder. "I never thought I'd say this, but you were the key. Brains and courage won today." Eli smiled faintly, looking at the horizon. "We all did it together. Brains, strength, courage, and teamwork. That's what made the difference." The townsfolk gathered around, offering thanks, applause, and admiration. Even the youngest children understood that victory came not just from size or strength, but from clever thinking, courage, and unity. Nova Junction had survived the greatest threat it had ever faced, and the people knew they had a new hero in their midst. Bran looked at Eli with a mixture of pride and humility. "I judged you by your size," he admitted. "I was wrong. You've shown me that courage and intelligence are more powerful than brute force. You've changed this town, Eli." Eli shook his head. "No, Bran, we changed the town together. Strength, brains, and courage each has its place. Together we can face anything." As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the town, Eli returned to his workshop, already planning new defenses. Bran remained in the square, keeping watch, while the townsfolk worked to repair damage and celebrate their victory. The Shardlings had been pushed back, but Eli knew they would return. From the distant plains, faint glimmers of crystal reflected the moonlight, hinting that the alien creatures were learning, adapting, and preparing for their next attack. Nova Junction would need to be ready, but with Eli Vance, Bran Malone, and the united townsfolk, they had proven they could face anything. The final showdown had taught them all a valuable lesson. Size did not determine power, strength alone was not enough, and courage combined with intelligence could overcome even the deadliest threats. Eli Vance, small in stature but immense in courage and intelligence, had shown Nova Junction that even the tiniest person could make the biggest difference. And Bran, massive and strong, had learned humility and the power of teamwork. Together they had not just defended a town, they had created a legacy. Nova Junction was safe for now, but the horizon promised more challenges. And when those challenges came, Eli, Bran, and the townsfolk would face them united, ready to prove that brains, courage, and strength, working together, could conquer anything. The morning after the final battle was quiet, almost serene. Nova Junction was still, the streets empty except for the occasional townsfolk who were already hard at work cleaning debris, repairing barricades, and gathering fragments of the shattered Shardlings. The air smelled of dust, scorched metal, and the faint hint of ozone from Eli's devices. Eli Vance sat on the edge of his small workshop, polishing a device that had seen more action than he had ever imagined it would. His green eyes scanned the horizon, alert as ever. Despite the victory, he knew the Shardlings were not gone. They had retreated, yes, but the creatures were clever. They were learning, and one day they might return stronger than before. Bran Big Buck Malone emerged from the main square, his massive frame towering over the cleanup crews. The cowboy's face was less tense than the past days, but there was still the weight of responsibility in his eyes. He walked toward Eli, boots thudding heavily against the wooden floorboards of the workshop platform. "You're still working?" Bran asked, his deep voice calm but carrying the faintest hint of admiration. Eli looked up and smiled. "I'm making sure everything's ready if they come back. The town can't depend on luck," Bran chuckled. "Luck never saved anyone. Brains, courage, and a little bit of strength maybe, that's what did it." Eli nodded. "Exactly, and you proved that, Bran. You proved that even the biggest and strongest can change when they work with others." Bran scratched his head, a gesture rare for someone so confident. "I learned a lot from you. I always thought size mattered more than anything. Turns out, courage, brains, and strategy matter more than I ever imagined." The townsfolk, having finished some repairs, began to gather in the square. They looked at Eli and Bran, seeing them not just as leaders, but as heroes who had saved their homes and families. Children ran up to Eli, tugging at his sleeves and asking questions about his gadgets. The adults whispered stories of his cleverness and bravery. "Eli," Bran called out to the crowd. "This little man," he gestured to Eli, whose smile widened slightly, "has saved our town more times than I can count in the past few days. And he's shown us all that being small doesn't mean being powerless. Brains, courage, and teamwork, that's what makes us strong." The crowd cheered, their voices filling the air with joy and relief. Eli felt a warmth in his chest he had rarely experienced before. Respect, admiration, and gratitude, things he had earned not through size, but through courage and intelligence. As the celebration continued, Eli noticed Bran's eyes on the horizon. The massive cowboy's gaze was serious, scanning the plains where the Shardlings had retreated. Eli understood Bran was already thinking about future attacks, planning how to protect the town even better. "You're still thinking about them," Eli said gently. Bran nodded. "Of course, we can't let our guard down, but seeing how everyone worked together, it gives me hope. Maybe next time we'll be even stronger. Eli smiled. Exactly, and we'll be ready. Over the next few days, the town worked together in a way it never had before. The barriers and devices Eli had set up became lessons for the townsfolk. Leela, the young mechanic, learned to create smaller versions of Eli's devices, helping to train others in the town. Tommy carried messages and supplies, feeling like a hero just as much as the adults. Even Bran spent time teaching people how to defend themselves, combining brute strength with strategy. One afternoon, Eli and Bran walked together through the repaired streets, watching the townsfolk work. Children played safely in the square, some pretending to be tiny inventors like Eli, others swinging imaginary hooks like Bran. Eli's small hoverbike hummed quietly beside him, ready for action if needed. "You've really changed this place," Bran said, his deep voice quiet now, almost reflective. Eli shrugged. "I didn't change it alone. We all did it together. And the town learned something important, that size, strength, and even fear can't define us. Courage and intelligence do." Bran nodded slowly, a rare softness in his massive features. "I've got to admit I misjudged you at first. You're more than just small." Eli laughed softly. "And you're more than just big, Bran. We each have our strengths. Together we're unstoppable." That evening, the town held a proper celebration. Lanterns lit the streets, and music played as people danced, sang, and shared food. The adults toasted Eli and Bran, while children ran around, imitating heroic poses and actions from the recent battles. Bran found Eli standing near the edge of the square, watching the festivities. "You know," Bran said, "I've never seen anyone so small make such a huge difference. People still call me the strongest, but you showed us all what it really means to be a hero." Eli smiled, a little embarrassed but proud. "I just did what I had to do. You all did the rest." The massive cowboy clapped his huge hands together. "Well, I think we've earned a little fun. What do you say we show the kids a real hero lesson?" Eli raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Bran grinned and bent down slightly. "Hop on my shoulders. Let's give everyone a better view of the town's heroes." The children cheered, laughing and shouting. With a little hesitation, Eli climbed onto Bran's shoulders, gripping firmly but carefully. From this height, the small inventor could see the entire square, the repaired streets, and even the distant plains where the Shardlings had fled. The townsfolk waved and cheered, clapping for both of them. "You're too small," Bran said loudly, echoing the words he had once used to dismiss Eli. "But what you've done, well, it's bigger than anyone could have imagined." Eli laughed. "Size isn't everything, Bran. You know that now." Bran nodded, smiling under his wide-brimmed hat. "I sure do, and thanks to you, this town has learned it too." The celebration continued late into the night. Eli and Bran sat together, sharing stories of the battles and planning for the future. They laughed, joked, and reflected on how far they had come, from strangers on the streets to partners who had saved an entire town. As the moon rose high above Nova Junction, Eli finally allowed himself a moment of rest. He looked at Bran and the town around them, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The Shardlings had been defeated, for now, but the town was stronger, smarter, and united. And Eli had proven beyond a doubt that even the smallest person could make the biggest difference. Bran looked at Eli with pride. "You know, little man, you've taught me something I'll never forget. Being big doesn't make you powerful. Being brave, clever, and willing to fight for what matters, that's true strength." Eli smiled, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "And that's a lesson worth passing on." The townsfolk, now gathered around the square one last time before heading to their homes, looked at Eli and Bran as symbols of hope, courage, and intelligence. Children would tell stories of the tiny inventor and the massive cowboy who worked together to protect their town. Adults would remember the bravery, the teamwork, and the lesson that size does not measure one's ability to make a difference. And as the night fell over Nova Junction, Eli felt a deep sense of peace. The town was safe. The people were inspired, and the Shardlings, wherever they were, would learn that Nova Junction was a town that could fight back, smartly, bravely, and united. Bran and Eli stood side by side, looking toward the horizon. Together they had faced impossible odds and won. Together they had shown the town and themselves that courage, intelligence, and strength, when combined, could overcome any obstacle. Eli Vance, the tiny man with a brilliant mind, had earned the respect of an entire town. Bran Big Buck Malone, the massive cowboy, had learned humility and the power of teamwork. And Nova Junction, once a town defined by size and strength alone, now understood that true power comes from courage, brains, and unity. The night was quiet, the stars twinkling above. Nova Junction had been tested and had survived. And at the heart of it all stood two unlikely heroes, one small, one massive, who had proven that even the smallest person could change the world. As Eli climbed down from Bran's shoulders and looked out across the quiet town, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, Nova Junction would face them together. The Shardlings might return, new dangers might arise, but the lessons learned, the friendships forged, and the courage discovered would carry them through. And in the heart of every townsfolk, a new understanding took root. Size and strength are only part of the equation. Bravery, intelligence, and teamwork, the power of the human spirit, were what truly mattered. Eli smiled, Bran smiled, and Nova Junction slept peacefully, ready for whatever came next. The smallest man in town had made the biggest difference, and the town would never forget it.